A Tale of Deception. Before we start, let me briefly introduce our speaker, Dr. John B. Johnson. So Dr. Johnson is working as a scientist, E1 in viral disease biology at Rajiv Gandhi Center for Biotechnology, Thiruvananthapuram. He has completed his bachelor's degree from Bharatiya University and master's degree in biochemistry from Bharatiya Desan University, Tamil Nadu. Sir has completed his PhD from NCCS Pune. He has been honored with doctoral fellowship and Ramalingam Swami Fellow by DBT. He has worked as a research fellow and assistant professor at Wake Forest Research Institute in USA. He has 18 years of experience in virus research. Sir has published 27 research papers in national and international peer-reviewed journals. He has completed several projects by nationally and internationally funded agencies like DBT, DST, and NIH at PI and COPI. And today he'll be sharing his knowledge with us. We are very much honored to have you, sir. We welcome you. And now I hand over the platform to Dr. John B. Johnson. So please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rajiv. Thank you, Ms. Raki, for the kind introduction. Okay. Hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir. You are very much audible.
Okay. So, very good morning to everybody. So, I'm going to share with you some a very interesting topic, I think, for everybody. This is about Nipah virus, and I'm going to talk with you about how Nipah virus, which is a respiratory virus and a paramyxa virus, actually interacts with the human complement system, a very important and integral part of the innate arm of the immune system. So I have provided a title, A Tale of Deceptions, because the interaction of these viruses, especially with the immune system, is like a tussle. It's like one person deceiving the other. So if the virus were to succeed, then the virus gets upper hand and the host succumbs or gets infected. But if the host were to get the upper hand, then the host would override the system and control the virus infection. So moving on, this is in brief the outline of what I'm going to talk to you today. I'm going to briefly talk to you about complement system and how these viruses actually interact with the complement system. I'm going to detail you about the Nipah virus, and I'm also going to talk to you specifically about some exciting research we have done in the little past of how Nipah virus actually interacts with the complement system, what a complement system does, and finally I would end up with some thought process as to how we can use this information to better treat this virus. So I would begin briefly by talking to you about the complement system. The complement system as such is a very primitive system, and it has been found as low as the sea urchins and ascidians and all those things. You can actually trace complement components. So it's an integral part of the innate arm of the immune system. And there are a whole bunch of proteins, and these proteins are predominantly present in the serum. And although local synthesis and systemically also synthesis takes place. So by and large, the complement pathway is like a cascade, and it can be divided into three major pathways: the classical, lectin, and the alternative pathway. So the classical pathway is basically activated by the antibody-antigen immune complex, which can actually bind to upstream molecules called C1, especially C1q, which actually triggers the complement cascade in the classical pathway. The unique sugars like mannose, etc., which is found on the surface of pathogens, especially bacteria and even viruses, actually triggers the lectin pathway. The alternative pathway, on the other hand, there is works by a mechanism called as a tick-over mechanism, where autohydrolysis of C3, the central molecule, happens, and that itself can result in the cleavage of the C3 molecule. So this upstream activation is very important because it is a precursor for the downstream steps, which is basically the cleavage of the central component, which is C3, which actually feeds into the complement enzyme. Like you can see here, C3 convertase, etc., which is basically contains C3b along with that. So this further cleaves C3 to form C5 convertase, which is an enzyme which can then cleave C5, and this can actually associate with a multimeric complex called as the membrane attack complex, which can then lyse pathogens. So the complement pathway is not an isolated pathway. It is considered as a connecting link between the innate and the adaptive immune system. So a lot of evidence over the years have shown that B cell responses, T cell responses, other innate cells like polydendritic cells, etc., they're all linked together by complement proteins. Especially cleavage products of complement proteins get deposited on the pathogens like C3b, IC3b, etc., which can act, and there are unique receptors, complement receptors on these antigen presenting cells, which can then present these antigens to B cells, T cells, etc., and mount an adaptive response. So thus, the complement system is not a standalone system, but it acts as a connecting link between the adaptive, innate, and the adaptive immune system. So the central point of today's discussion is about Nipah virus. And the Nipah virus actually comes under a specific genera called the Henipaviruses viruses. And this all comes under a large family of virus called as the paramyxovirus. And these are basically non-segmented negative strand RNA viruses. There are a lot of other viruses in this family, and I think many of you would be familiar with mumps virus, measles virus, etc., and human parainfluenza virus, etc. So Nipah virus and Hendra virus have been put in a specific genera called the Henipaviruses viruses, and these are basically deadly viruses. So this is one of the recent very good distribution map from the World Health Organization. So what you can see is this dark orange sites are sites where, or countries where outbreaks have been reported, and these are close proximity, and there are countries which have not documented, but there are reported outbreaks. And the main vector I'll describe shortly are fruit bats of the Pteropus genus. So this is basically the distribution of these bats. This is the entire region. And then there is another group of these fruit bats which is distributed here. So this is a very important vector for actually transmission of this viruses, because viruses has been isolated. So as far as Nipah is concerned, the most recent outbreak happened in 2018 in the state of Kerala in India, where I think there was considerable amount of mortality, and it is one of the success stories in the world as to effectively containing a pandemic. So briefly speaking, how does the transmission of Henipaviruses virus actually takes place? So if you take the Hendra virus, it is also as lethal as Nipah, but it's transmitted from bats, and it's like a spillover, and it infects the horses. And when horses get really sick, the people who handle these horses get this infection, and mortality is there, but it is not as significant. The most interesting aspect is that of the Nipah virus. It actually, the very prevalent or the highly prevalent case or reports first came from Malaysia, Singapore, etc., where where the transmission of virus happened from bats to pigs. And in the abattoirs where people were handling these pigs, there was a transmission from pigs to humans. So because of the from Malaysia, there were cases in Singapore where again it was transmitted from pigs to humans. The most interesting case occurred in Bangladesh, where the first transmissions or the well-documented human to human transmissions was reported. So source was identified to this neck palm sap that is collected from palm trees, and the bats feed on the palm sap that is collected, and the bat droppings was found to be one of the source of transmission from the bats to humans. And interestingly, there was marked human to human transmission, and there was significant amount of mortality. So as per some reports, it's almost 100%. It's anywhere from 57 to 100% mortality post-infection, which is very scary. So as far as the Nipah virus story is concerned, it is an emerging and a highly pathogenic paramyxovirus. And as I just mentioned to you, there's marked human to human transmission, greater than 70% mortality, especially in Bangladesh. And then if you look at this, there is microvascular infection is via the microvascular endothelial cells, and it affects the central nervous system. And there is also some evidence of viremia. So death is mostly due to brain stem dysfunction, and this is what I really is really scary. That is, a mean time to death is approximately around 9 days. So from all this, it is very clear it is a BSL-4 agent. That means you need to have a BSL-4 laboratory to actually handle and work with this virus. To date, there is no effective vaccine or therapeutic available. The best way to control this virus is containment of virus infection. So this is a brief schematic of the virus. It's a very small virus, around 200 to 300 nanometer, and it's an enveloped virus, as I told you. And the genome as such has N, P, M, F, G, and L genes. And of these, the F, the fusion protein, and G, the attachment protein, are the two glycoproteins that you can see here in the schematic, which is present in the virus envelope. And these are very important proteins. And the very interesting thing is the FRNB2 has been identified as the receptor to which this virus attaches to the host, by which the virus attaches to the host and infects the host. So now I have oriented you with the complement system, with Nipah virus, the pathogen, and then I'm going to start talking to you about the interaction of viruses with the innate arm of the immune system. So why is complement system important? So like this example here on the right actually illustrates very clearly. So this is an example of para-influenza virus 5, and then below you see that of mumps virus. So what I want to show here is a neutralization. This is a neutralization experiment where you see upon exposure of para-influenza virus or mumps virus to PBS, there is no virus neutralization. But when you expose the same virus to normal human serum, which is the source of complement, you can see the marked reduction in the number of plaques and marked neutralization. So on to the right is basically a very elegant control. So you can, if you notice on the left, C3 is actually the central molecule of the complement system. So the idea here is, if you use a serum that is depleted of complement or deficient in C3, then the complement pathway will not function effectively. Then effectively the virus will not get neutralized. So that is what you're seeing here in both PAV5 and mumps. When you treat with a C3 deficient or a depleted sera, it is almost like the control here. But when you reconstitute this depleted serum with C3, what you see is essentially the serum behaves like normal human serum, and you see marked neutralization in the case of both these viruses. So this shows that the complement system is very important in virus neutralization. So we were the first to actually ask certain important questions in the case of Nipah virus. So the fundamental questions that we asked were, does Nipah virus activate complement? Is Nipah virus neutralized by complement? That's the second thing. So why is this virus so infectious? Why does it even infect? So and people die because of this infection. So if a complement system is really there, so why is it getting neutralized? So if it doesn't get neutralized, then are there any mechanisms by which this virus is overriding the complement system? So we started investigating with these three fundamental questions. So obviously you would be asking, well, this is a BSL-4 pathogen, how can you work with it? So our first lead to investigating this virus was using a safe system. So we took a virus called as the vesicular stomatitis virus, and essentially we replaced the G protein, or the VSV has just one, it's also an enveloped virus, it's like a bullet-shaped virus, and we replaced the one single surface glycoprotein that is present on this virus with either the Nipah G or the Nipah glycoproteins, G or F, or a combination. And because this vector or this virus has a luciferase, our readouts can be luciferase with respect to neutralization. So the first question that we asked is, can Nipah virus activate complement? Obviously, we used a safe system called as the pseudotypes. And on the top, what you see here is an increase in the generation of C3A. So C3A is actually a cleavage product of C3, and it indicates the generation or the activation of complement. So this is the positive control, which is called as the cobra venom factor, which is a potent activator of complement, and you can see the robust levels of complement that is produced. So you can see that as you increase the concentration of the pseudotypes, there is an increase in the C3A generated, and below is an ELISA based approach where you can see that there is an increase in the C3A generated. So this shows that the complement system is activated. So obviously the fundamental thing is like, okay, if the complement system is getting activated, obviously the virus should get neutralized. That's what we saw with the PIV5 and the mumps virus. But we were in for a shock, because when you actually incubated the pseudotypes with two different donor serum, that is this blue bars that you see here is from donor 1, and then the hashed bars that you see here is that from donor 2. So keep in mind, this is not an intact wild type Nipah virus. It's just a pseudotype which is harboring the Nipah virus glycoproteins, and that itself was capable of inhibiting neutralization by complement. So is our assay system working? Yes, because this is the no serum control, there is no neutralization. But when you add antibodies against Nipah FNG glycoproteins, you see this marked neutralization. This was very, very interesting. So, and then the next obvious question is, so if that is the case, is it true? Does it happen in wild type Nipah virus also? So this part of the work was done in collaboration with Dr. Barry Rock at Galveston National Facility, where they have a BSL-4 laboratory. The first question that we asked was, does wild type virus activate complement? Yes, it does in a time dependent manner, and you can see that there is enhanced activation. Then the second question we asked was, does this virus get neutralized by complement? So this gray bars are actually missing. These are two donors where you the neutralization experiments, and you can see that the gray bars are missing here. That means there was no neutralization, and then you can see that even with the heat inactivated serum, what you can see is that there is obviously when you heat inactivate complement proteins. So this what you're seeing here is basically mumps virus. So when you take mumps virus and you treat with normal human serum, it's completely neutralized. With heat inactivated serum, obviously you don't get neutralization. But when you actually compare to the right side, this is with Nipah virus, and you can see that even when you add a very high concentration of serum, that is like 1:5 dilution, there's hardly any neutralization. And obviously heat inactivated serum also does not support this neutralization. So this says two things. One, the serum complement is incapable of neutralizing Nipah virus. And second thing is that there are not in a general population, in human population, the virus is not circulating and you don't have antibodies. So obviously the heat inactivated serum will not be able to neutralize this virus. So again, in continuation, why is this difference? Like if you take PAV5 or mumps, it's getting neutralized. We actually did an electron microscope experiment where we took PAV5. You see, this is the structure of Nipah virus. Has a pleomorphic structure. Sometimes it's spherical. And you see the virus envelope here. And this is the structure of PAV5, which is also having a pleomorphic structure. So then what you can see is that when you actually sensitize PAV5 with normal human serum and stain with an antibody against anti-C3, what you see is a marked deposition of complement proteins on the surface of the virion here. But the most interesting thing is, you look at the Nipah virus, even after treating with normal human serum and staining for the complement proteins, you hardly see any deposition, very little deposition. So that was very interesting. What is happening? So now I want to tell you a little bit more about complement before I proceed. So I told you that the complement system is an integral part of the innate arm of the immune system. And this system actually, unlike the adaptive arm of the immune system, lacks memory. So anything that comes across, across, or there is a hyperactivation of complement, it can be damaging to the host. So that has been well known. In the case of influenza virus also, it has been shown. Just like cytokine storm, the complement activation generates very potent anaphylotoxins like C3A, C5A, C4A, etc., which can cause a lot of effects, okay, damaging effects. So that's what happens. So how does the host overcome this? There's an inbuilt system of proteins called as the regulators of complement, which can actually block this unprecedented activation. Okay, so some of these regulators are membrane associated. Examples include CD46, CD55, CD59, and there are a bunch of other proteins called which are soluble, which are in the fluid phase, which includes factor I, factor H, C4 binding protein, etc. But the viruses are very, very, very sneaky. I have just presented to you an electron micrograph image of a mumps virus, wherein you can see there's a beautiful immunogold labeling for CD46. Okay, so how does this virus do it? This CD46 is actually a host protein. So these viruses, being enveloped viruses, they actually acquire the host complement regulatory proteins during the process of budding. So our current research in my laboratory here is to address whether this is a specific or a non-specific. Does it do it randomly? And we have very good evidence to show that it is more specific in nature. And other investigators are also have started investigating and finding that this recruitment is more specific in nature, and it involves crosstalk. So what does this complement regulators do? There are two major functions. One is inactivation of active components. So when the pathway is activated, you get something called as an active intermediate, which is C3b, which is a potent opsonin, which forms a part of the convertases, the enzymes for further cleavage, and this is an amplifying factor. and it's also involved in receptor engagement and crosstalk with the adaptive, this and other cleavage products. So what is the function of these regulators? One is these regulators can actually mediate the inactivation of this amplification loop is cut. How? Factors like factor H and I, the factor H is a cofactor and factor I is a unique enzyme which in the presence of cofactor factor H can actually inactivate C3b into IC3b. So please keep in mind it is IC3b, and this is important for the next two slides. So this can be visualized on an SDS-based gel after you do the assay. That's what I'm going to talk to you about shortly. Okay, so this is one function. Then there is also CD55 and CR1. These are two proteins. Like what it does is it acts at the level of convertase and it rapidly dissociates this convertase. So this enzyme is not available for further generation of C3b. So these are the two major functions of the regulators. Besides this, there are other groups of proteins called as complement inhibitors, which can actually bind to the certain steps and then actually block the progression of the complement pathway. Okay, now coming back to the Nipah story. Okay, why is this virus resistant? We were very curious to investigate that. And what we found, this is a very elegant system we have in our field, where we can actually mimic the in vivo system or what happens in a test tube, and then you can visualize the effect on a gel. So I will orient you in this gel a little bit. So C3b, as I told you, is a central molecule of the complement system, and then you can see it has a unique, when you run it on a Kumasi blue gel, it will have two subunits, alpha and beta. Okay, so when you actually take just the enzyme, and like if you don't add factor I, like if you just add factor I, nothing happens. If you add just the cofactor, again nothing happens. This is factor H way on the top. But look what happens when you bring the cofactor and the enzyme together. The enzyme is very, very little. You can't see on the gel. You see the alpha prime subunit is completely cleaved and you get an inactive C3b, which is IC3b, which is the generation of 67 and a 43 kilodalton fragment. That's such a beautiful system to test. But our question is, is there something like that it is happening in the with Nipah? So as I told you, these two circles or the ellipse indicates the inactivated forms, the cleavage of the alpha subunit. So here, this is how the Nipah virus proteins look when you run on an SDS page, and you can the proteins are labeled here, the NP and all those things, and then the fusion protein also mildly you can see here. When you just incubate C3b with Nipah virus, nothing happens. You see the intact C3b here. When you incubate this virus by without the addition of factor I, see what happens. You can see that completely the C3b alpha prime is gone, and you see the generation of the 67 and a 43 kilodalton fragment. That was so exciting because, it is something which was not only expected, because so far among all the enveloped virus, what was known as membrane associated regulators were recruited. But this was by far one of the reports where we showed that it is having a factor I-like activity. So we went on and this is just one more experiment. This is CR1 is another potent protein which is present on erythrocytes, etc. It has an additional function of inactivating C3b into a second step cleavage, which results in the formation of C3c and C3d, which is also an inactivated form. So when we add just CR1, okay, so this is the additional band you get when you use CR1 as a cofactor. But when you do add the CR1 to Nipah virus, it supports only the first cleavage, just like what you see on the left side. That is conversion of C3b to IC3b. This was very exciting because, so then the next obvious question is, what is the mechanism of NIV inactivation of C3b? So one obvious reason is that somehow the virus is acquiring factor I. So these are virus preps And then what you can see here is this is the control factor I, purified factor I. It has a heavy chain and a light chain. When you see a cross reactivity. And then when you actually do electron microscopy and probe this Nipah virus particles with anti-factor I antibody, you do see a staining. So we know for sure that the virus has a factor I-like activity, but still much is needed to be known, whether it is host derived or is it something else. Okay, so then continuing is, so do we have any solution to Nipah virus at all? Can it be treated? It has all these ingenious ways of overcoming the immune system. So what we saw so far is, unlike paramyxoviruses, other paramyxoviruses like Nipah, like PIV5 or like mumps, measles, etc., and Nipah virus is actually resistant. In the case of both pseudotypes and wild-type virus, it is resistant to complement. So the next question is, does NHS enhance neutralization? We know that antibodies can neutralize Nipah virus, but does antibodies, or when we add antibodies, do we have an additive effect in the presence of complement? And the answer is yes. So this experiment actually addresses that. So when you actually incubate the virus, or here in this case the pseudotypes, with just the Nipah F and G antibody, you see that there is neutralization. But what is very striking is when you add NHS, a complement source, there is much more enhancement in the neutralization, and that you can see, like even like 1:3200, 1:6400 dilution of antibody when it was used, you can see that it's an additive effect of complement. So that is very important. So that's the working model in the case of complement interactions with Nipah virus particles. Is, we know Nipah virus is an enveloped virus. It has two surface glycoproteins. We also saw that it can activate complement, and that is from the C3A you can see. And then we also saw that Nipah virus is very insensitive to complement or resistant to complement. And we have also identified a mechanism. Probably this virus actually has a factor I-like, not probably, it has a factor I-like activity. Whether it is host derived or is it a viral factor needs to be addressed. So, and then the bottom line is that yes, we can overcome or we can restrict Nipah virus infection, obviously with antibodies. And the good news is that complement can be a factor if there are antibodies. Even in the case of an acute infection, it can have a drastic effect. That being said, not much clinical trials or anything has been done in the case of Nipah virus. So that obviously brings us to the approaches. Actually, how can we counter that? So we can actually have vaccines that can account for or take into account the role of complement and develop potent vectors to restrict this virus. And then the other novel thing is like recruitment of factor I is something novel. So if that is such a, it appears to be a very important, and Nipah virus also causes, there is viremia associated with that. So the virus can actually hit the bloodstream and still people die because of this virus infection. So that means there is active recruitment of factor I or utilization of factor H in the serum, which can actually result in inactivation. So development of small molecule inhibitors to target this interaction. And then another thing is complement enhances the neutralization potency of antibodies. So that is very important. So we can have soluble receptor decoys, single chain antibodies, or even develop a vaccine approach to actually target these infections. So thus, it is not that we cannot address this, but because of the sporadic nature of this infection, not much emphasis is given onto that. But with the recent coronavirus outbreaks, one has to be always alert for some newer viruses to come forth, because already Nipah virus-like viruses have already been reported in Philippines and even in China, even inside a mine. So it's an important area that needs investigation. So that brings me to the end of the slide. And I was fortunate to work with all these people, Dr. Benhar Lee and Hector Aguilar, who actually provided us with the pseudotype viruses to address our initial question. I was in the lab of Professor Griffith Parks, and with Barry Rock, who was at that time at Galveston, we could do the in vivo work. So I think that's all I have for my presentation, and I think I will come back to you in case there are some questions that needs to be asked.
Yes, thank you, Dr. John. Now the session is open for the question and answer session. I invite all the participants to have any questions if they want.
So we have a question from Dr. Pabitra Mishra. Ma'am has asked, what is the action of other immunocells on NIP?
Okay. That's a very interesting question. So there are a lot of other factors that are being checked. Then the role of interferons, and people have investigated. But frankly speaking, not much has been done. Even the level of safety that is required to handle this virus. But people have investigated a lot, and the role of other immune factors are very critical. That is known. But it is one of the key factors, the short span of this infection, like, within maybe 48 hours to maximum 7 days, you see a really big spike in this infection, and we lose the patient to this infection. So there is involvement of multi-factors here, like lot of other immune parameters are involved in this infection.
Okay, thank you, sir. I hope the query is satisfied. We have another question from Dr. Subhadarshini Parida. Ma'am is asking how complement protein help in developing vaccine.
Okay, that's a very nice question. See, one of the things is when you actually take vaccines per se, people develop a lot of vaccines, and we have been also working on utilizing viruses as vaccine vectors and oncolytic vectors, etc. So what we see is, like, when people design one of the main things that is required for a vaccine or a vector to be to meet its standard is it has to reach its target sites. It has to be capable of eliciting good responses. So what happens is, when you take a vaccine and then when the complement system is so potent, if these vaccines can be arrested at such a step, especially in terms of using viruses as vectors, we need to involve complement, especially like incorporating complement regulators, etc., so that these attenuated vectors can actually bypass complement neutralization, and then there is a chance of more presentation, more immune response to be generated against these vectors and the antigen of interest. So there is the critical factor of involving complement, or taking into consideration complement as a factor in devising novel vectors or even vaccines.
Thank you, sir. We have many questions coming up. The other question is from Dr. Lipika. Dr. Lipika Patnaik. Ma'am is asking how bats withstand viral infection despite carrying so many deadly viruses.
That's a wonderful question. That is something very interesting, and people have been working on many aspects of this, and my own laboratory is interested in working in the aspect of complement. So it is still up in the air, and the limitation of reagents with respect to bats, bat research and all this is a problem. But the thing is, I'll tell you, all of us know about microbiome. Okay, so there are a lot of viruses, there are a lot of pathogens, etc., which are restricted to a particular species or to a particular animal, etc. So the main problem comes when there is a crossover. When these viruses actually breach and cross over, that's when the problem happens. And most of the, like if you take Ebola or if you take Nipah, Hendra, all these are residing in the bats. So somehow bats have a mechanism to restrict these viruses, and more or less this is, I think, according to me, it's part of their flora. Only when it actually crosses over, some of these viruses cannot be restricted. They adapt and evolve in the human source, and that's how it can be having devastating effects. But and another good example is herpes B virus, which is usually present in African green monkeys, etc., is harmless to the monkeys, but it can be very disastrous if it were to come and target humans actually. That is the simplest explanation, but there is much more to that in terms of restricting these viruses by the immune components, etc., will definitely be contributing in the case of bats.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the information. Next, we have Dr. Dipti Raut. Ma'am has said it is extremely informative and well presented session, and she said thank you to you. And now, ma'am is asking, what kind of cytokine storm do we see?
Yes, so that's again very nice question, and it is I think most of you will be aware with the coronavirus also, reports that is coming out of China and many other countries are have attributed to the severity in the clinical cases and the mortality associated with cytokine storm. So this is kind of known, especially in the case of respiratory viruses. So that like even in the lung and all these sites where this infection happens, the immune system per se, especially the innate immune system, goes into an overdrive. Like even as I mentioned in my talk, complement system is not just a pathway which goes and directs against a pathogen, kills a pathogen. So many factors are coming. There are cleavage products coming out of it. Like for example, the best example is C5a, which is a potent anaphylatoxins. And now we have like the large body of evidence is coming in the field of complement as to the involvement of interferons and crosstalk between complement proteins, etc. So it's a soup. The intention of the immune system is to protect the host, but that it reduces the lung capacity, etc., and oxygen deprivation, etc. It's basically a protective role of the immune system, but it goes overdrive, and that is where the fundamental problem is.
Thank you, sir. And there is another question on the present pandemic situation. It's from the botany department, and they are asking why the mortality rate or the corona effect is different in different countries, and even the same states of a single country. So
Okay.
if we have.
Yeah, although my talk is on
Nipah virus. Yes,
on Nipah, I can just tell you it's still early, and there's excellent work coming. So we still don't have a clear-cut answer to that. But one of the recent reports that's coming, especially from Vietnam, where there was one mortality reported, and there is not a direct thing people are telling. So one possibility is that most of the RNA viruses, they with amount of replication and with spread, etc., chances of it getting attenuated are more. There is always a chance as it crosses countries and borders, etc. This virus, the rounds of replication can actually attenuate it also. That is one reason. The other reason is, see, there can always be some amount of cross protection. So this kind of thing was experienced during the HIV outbreaks in the 70s and 80s. So people, there was a false reactivity kind of thing which was happening. So what I'm meaning to say is that there could be natural antigens. There could be corona-like viruses that has been spreading, especially in the Southeast Asian region, etc. So these antibodies might actually cross-react with SARS-CoV-2 and could restrict. So I'm just thinking these are two things. And the other thing is like slowly this attenuation can also give rise to herd immunity, etc., which could be the reason. I cannot clear-cut tell that now, but there are multiple factors which could contribute to the differences in mortality that we see. And of course, the genetic makeup of individuals also is a contributing factor. That's what we saw among Caucasian and Black American population in the United States, where the Black American population seem to be more susceptible, and also socioeconomic background is also important. So there are multiple factors. I hope I addressed that question.
Thank you, sir. Very well explained. We have another question from Dr. Rahana. Ma'am is asking, what are conditions favorable for the growth of this virus? I hope she's addressing Nipah virus.
Like in the case of if she's asking experimentally in the laboratory setup, I can tell for Nipah virus, most of these viruses are cell specific. They need a unique cell where the receptors are there available for it to grow. So in our experience, most of the cell lines in the case of Vero cells, etc., and also HeLa cells, A549 cells are common laboratory cell lines, transformed cell lines. We are able to culture this virus, especially case of Nipah virus. But if she is asking in the context of a real life situation where an infection is taking place, the endothelial cells are the target cells, and FNB2 receptors are there. So how the transmission takes place, it's totally out of control. You cannot predict like influenza virus also, but Nipah virus just comes just like that, and as of now we know it is bats. So so that is how the source of infection is in the case of humans.
Thank you, sir. I hope ma'am's query is satisfied. We have one more question from Dr. APJ Kumar. Sir is asking, in the view of the new pandemic, how far our research reached to found out if the cells changing itself, its structure is stable, how human being and other mammals or animals which being a part of spreading infectious. Well, I could not completely understand the question. It is, but I think sir wants to ask how human being and other animals are a part of this spreading infections. How humans spread infections? Yes.
Okay. So the first aspect is from the amount of literature that is coming and the interest and the global thing. That there is a lot of interest in this research in this virus, and that's why countries like Russia has launched a vaccine. That was today's morning report. Oxford has been launching, US and Europe, etc. That's one thing. That's aspect. So there's a lot of interest into this, which is very good. The other aspect is like if I understand his question correctly, the thing is like there is my personal belief, and science says that there is a lot of involvement of the ecosystem and host involved here. So the initial outbreaks of even Nipah has been attributed to El Nino effect. So whereby these bats actually were residing in the jungles, and they are there, but then the weather pattern changes caused the bats to shift to human populated areas where there are fruit trees to feed, etc. So it is a very fine balance. So we need to make sure that humans and the wildlife actually find a common interest and try to coexist. We cannot cross over. So if we start crossing over, there are a lot of exotic viruses which are in these animals, and there is every chance that they can cross over. They can easily adapt to humans, and that is what happens in the case of influenza viruses also. As it starts jumping hosts and having multiple intermediates, they become more and more potent. So if I understood this question right, everything is connected, and it is a fine, delicate balance, and human beings need to respect that. If you go and overexploit things like that, what is happening, then that is going to be disastrous, and that can be disastrous for the entire humankind. That's what we are seeing with coronavirus now.
Yes, sir, very well said. Where I want to end, that we all have to agree to the point that we have not inherited this land from our forefathers. but we have borrowed it from our children. So we have to find a sustainable balance so that we don't face any pandemic situation as we are facing now in future. So
Exactly.
moving forward, we have another question. There's a question if homeopathic medicines have any role in controlling these viruses.
So thanks for the question. I'm not a medical practitioner, and I'm not so sure about the literature out there. But I can say that at least in Kerala, at least in some of the areas in Kerala, like Poonthura, etc., the government has been supplying homeopathic medicine to people in the coastal belt. That's what I heard from one of my friends who's there. But I really haven't read much literature into what are the beneficial effects of homeopathic medicine on that. So I cannot really go out on a limb and say, yes, it is going to be protective, or no, it's not going to be protective.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think the last question for this session is if there is any particular age group for the attack of the Nipah virus. This question is being asked because for Spanish flu, the middle-aged young ones are targeted. For corona, immune-compromised people are targeted. So, is there any specific age group for the Nipah virus?
Well, you cannot actually put a window of infection for a Nipah virus. Okay, so the thing is, like, it's a highly infectious virus. But I can give you some very promising examples, especially from colleagues who have been working in the clinical setup, who have been telling about Nipah viruses, like the face mask and close contact with Nipah patients. If you can avoid that, that has been a very, very positive thing in containing Nipah virus infection. So as far as Nipah virus infection is concerned, it does not differentiate between age. Okay, so far the receptors are present and it should be still infected. But at the same note, in the case of influenza virus, yes, I agree with you. 1918 flu, it was more towards the younger population, and the later pandemic was somewhat mid-age or later age or something like that. But in the case of coronavirus, I can say for clear, again, age, the people with comorbidities or people who are aged have been susceptible, it is true. But if you look at a global scenario, that has changed. As the virus migrated from Europe and then started devastating the United States, what you see there is it's not, and even in UK, there have been cases where children have passed away because of this infection. So you cannot put really a window like, okay, yes, that this is going to attack only children or only like that. Some viruses are there. For example, we are working on Chandipura virus here in a laboratory, and this also causes mortality. But in that case, yes, children are the one who are succumbing to this infection more than adults. So in the case of Nipah, as of now, you cannot put a window of age. But I think the prevalence of elderly people who work in these abattoirs and then working in all the farm setup, etc. So those people can get exposed and they can get more infected, and by then they are sick and they're isolated in the hospital. So yeah.
Thank you, sir. There's another question from Dr. Pavitra Mishra. Ma'am is asking, what about the genetic mutation rate of Nipah virus as compared to other viruses like influenza virus, Ebola virus, and coronavirus?
Okay, so that's a wonderful question. So in the case of Nipah virus also, because of the sporadic outbreak and not much extensive studies has been done, in the case of laboratory setup, any RNA virus for that instance, like with repeated cultures or repeated passings, they do tend to mutate. Okay, but as far as in the case of influenza virus, you have abundance of clinical data, abundance of laboratory data, which shows that yes, there is very, very rampant mutations taking place. But from our experience, what we see is that in the case of Nipah, it's not as much. It's much more restricted, unlike the influenza virus.
Thank you, sir. We have no more questions in the chat section. If any participant has any other question, you may ask. So all our participants are in praises. It's a very excellent presentation and very well explained. Let's see for one more minute if there are any other questions being asked.
Sure.
Yes, we have Dr. Julie. Ma'am has left a message. Nice presentation, sir. What is the actual carrier of Nipah virus? In Kerala, the people are scared of consuming native foods that are homeyard, as it may be consumed by some pet.
Okay. It's a very nice question, because you know, the press and everything was really behind this. Actually, can we eat? Because this was a age-old practice. You go, then if there is a fruit that is eaten by birds and stuff, people go and eat it because they think that it is really tasty, because the birds and so in the case of bats also, one has to be very careful, because at least in the case of Bangladesh, there's a clear scientific evidence that the shedding from bats, from fruit bats, in especially, I explained to you in the cartoon, in especially the sap, okay, which they use for making toddy and etc. That is one of the primary source of transmission. So I would be, telling people to be a little bit cautious. So if you find something that is, given the Nipah incidences and etc., it's better to avoid fruits that has been, eaten by bats or eaten by other birds, or if it is damaged on a tree, etc. I would recommend. Then, as far as the overall fruits is concerned, see, what we have seen experimentally is, when you take wild type Nipah virus and you expose it to detergent, like even like a Triton or Tween, like even 0.001%, 0.01%, this virus gets completely obliterated. Okay, it goes infectious. So detergents are very, very powerful tool against Nipah virus. And I think a mild detergent to wash your fruits wouldn't hurt, before you actually, and after that, after detergent, you wash the soap off from these fruits, and then you consume it. I think it should be relatively safe.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And to add to it, there are soaps and detergents available in the market for washing vegetables and fruits.
Right.
So we can opt for that option as well. Next, we have Dr. Rahana. Ma'am is asking, are we acquire immunity after primary attacks? Ma'am is asking if you acquire the immunity after the primary attack of the virus.
Yes, you should definitely be developing a very good potent response against Nipah virus glycoproteins, definitely. And so I have to really look at more literature into that. But and one of the approaches is, there was this Australian group, very good investigators from Australia, who have actually developed antibody-based approaches to target, like a therapeutic. When there is a big Nipah outbreak, and the government of Kerala was also considering an approach to use those antibodies and like that. So definitely there will be a primary antibody response, and then how long it is sustained, we have to go back to these patients there are patients who have recovered from this Nipah virus infection also, at least in Kerala. So we can go back to them and look at how long the protective immunity is. Like in the case of pox virus, especially dry vaccine against for smallpox, etc. It's almost like 25 years you get to protective immunity, and then you need to go for a boost. But it's some of these viruses, they can give a long-term immunity, but some of them are very, very weak. Like in the case of coronavirus also, there is a say by WHO and other big people around, they say that you might not have a long-term immunity in the case of coronavirus, even if you have coronavirus infection. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I hope Madam's queries addressed. If any further queries, ma'am, please leave a comment. We have another question from Subhadarshini, Dr. Subhadarshini. Ma'am is asking what factors causes mutation in Nipah viruses, and for what they can be transmitted from one species to other.
Okay. So the first question was what causes mutations?
Mutations in Nipah viruses.
Okay. So as far as the factors can be many. the factors of that can cause mutations in the genome can be many. Okay, you cannot really put a cap on that. The very process of if you look at an in vivo setup, like when a virus replicates, what happens is there is so much of in vivo factors that contribute. There are immune stresses and so many stressors from the cell. So the virus tries to adapt to those. Okay, it already has modulation mechanisms, etc. And then basically, like if you look at the polymerases, etc., they are all not foolproof. Okay, so they are prone to error, and these mutations can be due to factors governing the infection. Like, for example, there's an infection and then there is so many other factors. So the virus tries to adapt to that, and this can actually drive the mutations. Or it can be an inherent property of just the polymerase putting in errors during the process actually. And could you please repeat the second question?
So the second question is, let me please see. For what they can be transmitted from one species to other?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So that is something which actually perplexes virologists and health experts, everybody. What causes this jump? It's a very big question. So the best and simplest answer is, if there is a homology in the type of receptor to which the virus can actually attach. Like, for example, FRNB2 was the receptor here. So if we have something like that, which the virus can readily attach to and infect the cell, then that could be one of the factors. And then also the adaptability. Okay, so how well it adapts to the initial thresholds. So that is also a factor, because we have n number of viruses in this world, but we are not getting infected with everybody with all these viruses, only select viruses. So there is a selectivity, and that is what is very essential for crossing over this barrier.
Thank you, sir. I hope we don't. I think we don't have any further questions. I think we can wrap up the session. Thank you, sir. It was a very nice and informative presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And with this, we come to the end of the morning session. In the evening, we have Dr. Praveen Raj Solomon, and sir will be speaking on statistics in everyday life. So we'll be meeting there again. Thank you so much.